Hey everyone, this is Thyworm and today I want to talk about the most prevalent issues with Last Epoch, which is still in early access. Consider it player feedback, constructive feedback, from a big fan of the game. By pointing out the biggest issues, it also helps you decide if you should already buy the game while it is in early access, so let's start. Number 1. The combat. One of my biggest beefs with the game is the combat. Not so much the system itself, which does a lot of things right, especially balancing and having a lot of viable builds available, but the combat look and feel. It's not that easy to describe, but what is lacking is an overall feeling of impact on many levels. It is an action RPG, but the action part is currently not very impressive. There's a sense of force missing. Enemies feel like they're made out of paper. You're hitting an enemy with an erasing strike and what you see just doesn't really line up in terms of animations, physics and the overall idea you're actually hitting something. The animations are kind of wonky in many cases. For example, werebear form. It just looks a little weird to me. Maybe werebears are just weird, but it's true for many other skills too. Animations play an important role in making combat a realistic experience, and I feel too many animations are still not completely there yet. Hammer throw comes to mind, which seems like it's a placeholder, or mana strike, or shatter strike. Usually spells look fine, honestly. It is mostly melee related animations I have an issue with. The good news is that animations are still being worked on in phase 2. Then the physics. The moment you strike an enemy actually isn't in line with how the enemy physics operate. It doesn't look like you're hitting anything, like you would in Grim Dawn or Path of Exile. It seems you're glancing over an enemy model, without you feeling an actual effect of your weapon impact or spell hits. There are some nice ragdoll physics, but they're not in sync with your actions. The animations and physics combined result in the feeling that enemies are made out of paper instead of flesh and blood, and slaying them is like blowing against a piece of paper instead of sinking your axe into a monster. Number 2. Performance. While Last Epoch has made some pretty impressive improvements on performance since they launched into early access, it is still an ongoing issue at the same time. Many people in the comments are still struggling to make this game run on their pretty decent systems. While I have full confidence that at release these performance issues will be sorted out because of the progression the devs are showing up to now, the fact remains that in its current state, in patch 0.7.6c, the game can run like crap. Now, generally speaking, you're going to be fine in most areas with an average PC, let's say an i5 with a 1080. There are still quite some elements within Last Epoch that cause massive frame rate drops, however. For example, the areas in chapter 7 where ice and fire monsters are fighting each other. The enormous number of particles in this area is something even my PC can't handle, and I see significant frame rate drops. The campaign has a few zones like this where, generally speaking, regardless of what your character does, the performance is really bad. Then there are certain classes that struggle a lot more than others, most notably necromancers. You can get 35 to 40 minions in this game pretty consistently and easily, and you will also notice this takes a toll on performance, no matter the zone you are in. There are just too many calculations going on for the game to keep up, which results in frame rate drops. Performance is really a lot better with characters that don't rely on tons of summoned creatures. This is true in many action RPGs, by the way. Then there are a few spells that are really not optimized and cause massive issues in zones like the arena. Particularly spells that autocast can be problematic in my experience because they can cause a stutter sometimes. And spells or attacks that just look really flashy, like the avalanche spell combined with maelstrom, seems just too much, once again, for the engine to properly handle at this point in time. Number 3. No procedurally generated levels. Chris Wilson, head of Grinding Gear Games, also known as the literal god of action RPGs, once gave a famous presentation at GDC where he explained why Path of Exile is such a successful game. He talked about some of the design pillars of that game, which are basically strategic pillars that form the foundation of your game. One of the pillars was procedurally generated content. Why? Because it keeps the game fresh. Grim Dawn is a beautiful game, I love to play that game, but the whole campaign and all of its zones are not randomized. Every time I start a new character, I have to walk through all those zones again, and they never change. It really kills the fun for me to start a new character because going through all the maps is such a drag, honestly. Diablo 2 also had a campaign, but the maps were always randomly generated. Path of Exile saw how successful Diablo 2 was and adopted the same philosophy and designed around it. They designed their game around randomly generated or procedurally generated content. Last Epoch doesn't do this. It's very much like Grim Dawn in this sense. The campaign maps are static, they never change, and by now I have around 14 characters hours, I don't even need to look at the minimap anymore. I can dream the campaign in my sleep. Now, that's not horrible per se, because the campaign isn't all that long. In around 2 or 3 hours I'm through. They will add 2 more chapters, increasing the time for a veteran like me with maybe 1.5 hours, and that's fine. You could even opt to not complete the entire campaign and start running endgame as soon as you reach the end of time, the main hub in Last Epoch. So for the campaign maps, I think we can give them a pass, as you would only run them once per character, and after that you're never returning there. For endgame, however, this is an issue. The Monolith of Fate uses the same maps over and over again. There's an element of randomization, sure, because the modifiers are random and the map that is selected is random, but the maps themselves are static. And after a while, you've seen them all. I guess there are around 10 to 15 maps maybe. The objectives in those maps are random again. Sometimes you need to kill a boss, sometimes some artillery device, sometimes clear a shrine, but the layout of the maps is static. It's not as boring as running maps in Grim Dawn, but it is also not as exciting as running maps in Path of Exile. Now, I don't actually think that 11th Hour Games is going to change this as far as I know, because I don't think they designed for this from the start. It seems to me, but I'm not a dev, that changing this system at this point in development from static to procedurally generated content is quite a massive undertaking. I do hope they do this at some point though, simply to increase the longevity of the endgame modules. Number 4. Music and sound design. This is subjective, for sure, but hey, this is my video. The music to start with. While I like the music just as, let's say, standalone songs, I don't feel they fit very well into the game. We have this melancholic piano tune that is prevalent in most areas of the game, primarily the end of time. I even hear this tune in my sleep these days, and it just gives off this super sad vibe. This feeling that everyone died at the end of a non-violent, post-apocalyptic movie, and now mankind is doomed for eternity. And in my experience, that's not what the game is about. It's not all gritty gloom and doom. There's some hope as well. You're helping out the deer after all, defeating the demon with some spear. That's the summary of Last Epoch. I have similar issues with the guitar song that features the muted horn, I think, and then the piano comes in. It is the Monolith of Fate song, basically. It's a beautiful song, don't get me wrong, but it just doesn't really fit this endgame system. This would be perfect for a game like Journey, some walking simulator. But we're killing like 150 monsters over here in the freezing cold, and here we have this super soothing tune in the background. Telling me what exactly? I feel quite some of the music doesn't really fit the scenery. I would either like to see that the music is toned down quite a few notches from melancholic level 8 to level 3, or that it keeps some of the same vibes but doesn't include these notable piano tunes and riffs, because they also get repetitive. If the music would just as a whole move towards the background more, it serves more as a filler material, and that could be a musical design decision. Or if the music isn't supposed to be filler, but let's say a more prominent part of the gaming experience, I really believe they should rethink what pieces of music they play in which zones, so that it fits more with the storyline, so that it doesn't get cut off halfway when walking through zones, so that it becomes something that enhances the game instead of being something that is from time to time a little bit annoying. Sound effects have improved quite a bit over time, but especially some skeleton firing arrows and some other enemies and skill effects as well have some really annoying sharp sounds. It is the sort of sound that really stands out, and sound effects shouldn't stand out, but be in line with what happens on the screen. While video editing, I basically have to mute these sounds because they're so sharp and not mixed correctly that they interfere with my own voiceover. This is a minor issue really, but part of the same subject, basically the sound department. I think it plays a big role in the overall feel of the game. Last Epoch could be improved a lot by creating a more fitting soundtrack and sound effects. Number 5. Endgame variety. This is not a totally fair complaint, but as this is a sort of a current state of the game kind of video, I'm putting this in. I have around 250 hours in the game so far, and as the campaign takes maybe 4 hours, the majority of my time is spent in the endgame systems that are currently available. While there are more endgame content modules planned, and I'm sure they'll bring a ton of variety, the endgame as of now is rather plain. The arena with the waves is just that. While it was improved recently with more arena layouts, some really cool ones with traps, it's still in the end just your character fighting waves of enemies. Endless waves really, in order to level as fast as possible or to get on the leaderboards for the bragging rights. It's just kinda boring is my point, especially the first 60 waves or so that any decently geared and built endgame character can defeat with one hand while having dinner at the same time. I'm not saying they should make it more difficult, I'm just saying that it is inherent to the design of an arena wave-based endgame module, but that doesn't make it any less boring. Maybe adding modifiers to the mix every 30 waves could spice things up a bit. Maybe character limitations, like removing or disabling one of your skills, could be interesting. No clue if the engine even supports this honestly, but still. Monolith of Fate is the other endgame system. It's pretty cool and very good for loot, but as mentioned before, it lacks variety due to missing procedural generation. The reason I'm still spending hundreds of hours in the not super exciting endgame systems is because of the build variety. I'm trying out a bunch of builds and I create guides for the ones I really like, and I enjoy that a lot. I just wish there would be more variation. At the game's release, I think this endgame complaint will be mostly solved because there are 3 more endgame modules coming up. Number 6. A loot filter. It is on the roadmap for Phase 4, but that is still some time away, probably like half a year. And I need a loot filter so bad, guys, you can't imagine. I'm basically only playing endgame, and when I want to build a character, which is the only thing I want to do, I'm looking for specific gear. And without a loot filter, I need to manually hover over all the loot that drops, and that's a lot of loot, I can tell you. And then look at the affixes, and then use my brain, and then look at the tiers of the affixes, and then use my brain again. It's extremely exhausting. A loot filter isn't just quality of life anymore in a game like Last Epoch, it is a must-have feature that I would love to see implemented as soon as humanly possible. It would make my life and the life of many other Last Epoch endgame enthusiasts a lot easier. Phase 4, guys, Phase 4. To conclude, I specifically chose to not include 2 topics in this list. First, graphics. In my opinion, graphics are overrated first of all, and graphics have never broken or made a game. Graphics are not a gameplay mechanic. Graphics are really not that important in an action RPG where it is all about progression, the loot fever, character builds, balancing and slaying monsters. Wolzen is what happens if you disregard everything I just said and use nice graphics, release hot garbage and then work your ass off fixing the game. Last Epoch is what happens if you create a very solid core game first and improve graphics down the line. Second topic I didn't discuss, multiplayer, because I just don't care. I always play these games solo, and ironically, I'm not the only one. The majority of players are solo players in action RPGs, and unless your game is designed around co-op play, like Kill Squad for example, or Tribes of Midgard, I completely disregard multiplayer. Almost no one plays multiplayer in Grim Dawn or Path of Exile. It should be very low on the list of priorities, and I think 11th Hour Games has those priorities set in the correct order. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video and take it for what it is meant to be. Constructive criticism, also to the devs, but then in my own way, which is by creating a video. Soon I'll make the opposite video, a top list of reasons you should buy Last Epoch right now, because reasons are plenty. Follow me on Twitter at Thyworm. Thanks for watching and making it to the end. See you soon. Bye bye.